Hello. So let's start with, if you ask 9 out of 10 educated people in India how they know their history, this is most likely the answer that you'll get. What they'll know is there was a long, long time ago, there was this Indus Valley civilization, and then the Aryan invasion happened. After that, there's like a long period where there were some Hindu kings about which they don't know much, except there was caste system and there might be sati. Then there was 1000 years or maybe 800 years of Mughal rule. Aurangzeb was the only bad Mughal emperor and everybody else was good, that got us good art and culture. The British took over from the Mughals and ruled us for 200 years. They might have economically exploited us, but they made us really modern. And after that, Gandhiji and Nehruji finally got us freedom by non-violence. Now, what's the problem with this narrative? The problem is that it's a very selective and a very false colonial narrative. Let us explain why so. The first thing, when you speak about Aryan invasion theory, which is scientifically wrong, it creates caste division and it's a fake data that it's based on. When you say you don't know much about like practically thousands of years before the Turkic invasion started, it basically hides greatness of the Indian culture and it highlights a very selective narrative. When you say Mughals got us art and architecture, it projects Turkic invaders as benevolent conquerors, which they were not. When you directly jump to the British Empire and just fixate with the modernity of it, you promote them as positive social change agents, whereas they were in fact a pretty brutal colonizer. When you provide exclusive credit to only two people and only one political party, it provides credit only to pacifism, whereas the fact was there was many other layers and perspectives in the Indian independence struggle. Now, having said that, we want to take a look at what is the result of this narrative. The result is that today's generation, or at least many of today's generation, would identify and align completely well with the colonial culture. They'll know Shakespeare, they'll know Akbar the Great, they'll know Newton the scientist, they'll know Taj Mahal as architecture, and we'll feel very positive about it. However, they'll either not know about their own culture or feel negative about it. For example, they won't know our literature like Kalidasa, they won't know famous kings, Indian kings like Krishnadeva Raya. They won't have an idea about what exactly did Aryabhatta do as a scientist, and they will never have heard of the Brideshwara temple. Now, what is the result of having such a mindset, or what's the cost of continuing to learn the colonial narrative, right? It inculcates a very defeatist mindset, and it tells you that Indic culture is regressive, tells you that invaders got us progress in art, tells you that Indians were enslaved for 1000 years, it tells you that pacifism is the best policy, and it breeds a defeatist mentality and a self-hating attitude. Now look at what the correct history narrative could have been. Look at how many more layers and how much more complexity is had. There's pre-Harappan period, there's the Vedic Sanskrit civilization of Saraswati era, there's the Jain evolution, there's Maurya era, there's thousands of years of Hindu kingdoms, and then there's early Islamic invasions which were repelled, a fact that not many people know, followed by the Ghaznavid invasions, after which there was again 300 years of Hindu rule. Then came the Delhi Sultanate, after which again there was Rajputs, Vijayanagar Empire, East Indian empires, which were again 300 years of Hindu rule. Only then followed by the Mughal Empire and other Turkic sultanates. Then the Marathas came into picture, there was the Sikh Empire, and the British took over from them and not the Mughals. The independence struggle actually included a lot more than the Gandhi and Nehru. So this is our real history. Now, if it had been taught this way, how would it have been different from the colonial narrative, right? So A, it shows a common cultural thread. So it inculcates a sense of a nation and not merely a political state of India. It highlights the positives of Indian culture rather than just dwell on negatives like sati, caste system, divisiveness. It tells you the truth about the invaders' ideology and the fact that it was not merely a casual invasion for wealth's sake. It actually gets to the root of it. It tells you that we were not merely slaves for 1000 years, but we were actually in a state of confrontation and we fought back as hard as we got. It shows that the Mughals as such were not as significant as people would want us to believe. So it shows that British took over from the Marathas. So it shows the significance that there was 100 years of Maratha rule before the British actually came into picture. And then it also shows that the freedom struggle not only was all about like Indian National Congress, Gandhi or Nehru, but there was also many other political parties of all shades and colors, of all approaches that were involved, and finally got us the political independence in 1947. So that's a very different approach to studying history that we've typically been used to. Now, what's the result of learning the Indic narrative as against the colonial narrative? So it results in a liberated mind where you think that the Indian culture is progressive. You understand the fact that civil invaders got us destruction. You're wary about repetition of the same in the future. You understand that India was in a state of conflict, not slavery, for 1,000 years. You understand that assertiveness is the best policy, not pacifism. And you have a positive and a self-loving mindset instead of a self-hating one, which the colonial narrative inculcates in you. So future always belongs to the people who think they can win. If you're fundamentally taught to believe that you can only lose, the result is only assured destruction, which is why it's very critical to learn the Indic narrative versus the colonial narrative. Now, how does our company, ITIHASIKA, come into picture for this? Now, our idea is to contribute to the correct narrative, which we refer to as the Indic narrative, not by preaching, not by teaching, and not by mere enforcing our ideas on others, but we want to do it via products that are perceived as cool products by the next generation. And using these cool products, we'll implant positivity and a genuine understanding of history by connecting it to our culture. Predominantly, we're trying to use subliminal messaging here rather than a direct preaching. And how do we want to do it? Via merchandise, which is things like wall art, mouse pads, phone cases, coffee mugs, which have a very cool looking design, and it assertively puts and promotes our history and heritage to whoever is interested in purchasing them. We want to do it via animation movies, which project our right narrative by telling the story of our true heroes and connecting the dots in the way that we explained in the slide before. And we want to do it via comic books, which have a very modern take to it, very good illustration, high quality, good humor, combined with genuine understanding of history, which appeals to teenagers and young adults. So these are our three primary product lines that we want to develop as a part of ITIHASIKA. Now, having said that, let's take a look at what our strategy is, what are the actual goals we have, and how much money we need for it. So the first step we call is crawl, which is already done at this point. So we have a YouTube with 57,000 subscribers already, 2 experimental videos which have 6 million plus hits. Additionally, we also have produced an animation movie, fairly basic animation, but nevertheless a full-length movie that tells the history of India in the last 1,000 years via stories of 10 monarchs, each of who is compared to a Vishnu avatar. So that connects the culture with the history and makes it interesting for people. So we've already done that using crowd-funded money that we received over the past 2 years, and we have a fully functional e-commerce website for US and India with all our products listed out there, all the initial set of products. Of course, there's scope for expansion always. Now, having done this, the next step is what we call walk, where we need more help from generalist owners like yourselves. The next movie we want to make is 9 Heroic Women, and we'll call it Navyuke Navdurga. So it has to connect to the Durga concept, and it'll be last 1,000 years, heroic women from each century. And that will also in parallel be done along with comic books, where we have like an agreement with Garuda Prakashan, and it will be available as a hard copy and as a digital copy. So 22 comic books is our initial idea, and we need $15,000 each for both of these. $15,000 for the movie, $15,000 for the comic books. If that is successful, we want to get to the stage which we call run, where we want to invest in professional digital marketing to a point where the e-commerce business becomes self-sustaining, where using the money from the e-commerce business, we keep producing more and more videos which we offer to our subscribers for free on YouTube, and also some of them for purchase on Vimeo. And the final objective that we have, which will be the definition of success of this whole venture, is what we call the fly stage, where ideally we would want to align with some famous movie maker or a professional studio to actually produce a Netflix worthy or a theatrical release worthy history series with the correct Indian history narrative, not the colonial narrative, but a Netflix series with the Indic narrative. We also want to have comics not just limited to 22, but on a monthly subscription basis with a mass reach. So that's our final goal. So that's the story of ITIHASIKA, and that's the kind of funding that we need to make each step happen. In the meanwhile, you can also check out our website, www.itihasika.com. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I'm hoping to hear back from you with more questions and hopefully be able to take the engagement forward with your generous donations.